Hey, Lori, how's it going? Thank you for coming to the Right Mindset podcast today.
Great, and thank you for having me.
Absolutely. You and I, we met through the Twitter. We tweeted to one another, and I loved your energy. I love you have such a positive outlook on life. Plus, you get the community kind of working and thinking with your tweets. And I was
Oh,
like, I
thanks.
got to get Lori on here. She has such a bright energy, and I'm grateful for that. Thank you so very much for that.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Now, Lori Hayes is an author, and she writes a series of family friendly books. I would say, right?
Mostly.
They're not kid books, they're family friendly. And On your Twitter, what really got me excited was, again, as I'm saying, is like you get the community really going. So, for example, like what is your definition of happiness? Was something that you just recently asked, and it's interesting because it's not necessarily quote unquote a writing question, but it's a motivation question, which is how us authors write. We what motivates us to be happy, and what motivates our characters. Do you have someone that goes through your Twitter and does your publishing for that, or are you the one who comes up with these questions? And what's the process for that?
So I'm the one that comes up with the questions. I, at one point, had hired somebody, and she was wonderful. But I just decided that I felt like I could do that on my own. So I come up with the questions and I try to post consistently every day at about the same time.
Now, do you have it set up on like a buffer system where, or you like get to the phone, you're like, oh, it's 2 o'clock.
Yes, I do
Okay,
it first
all
thing
right.
every morning. I really should do the buffer. I tried it once. I just haven't done that. So I enjoy interacting with everybody.
You're very interactive, and it shows because you get the return. Your tweets are getting 2, 3, even sometimes 10,000 views, and then the interaction is really amazing. So,
Thanks.
now, just so you know, at the top of every show, what I like to do is I ask our author guests a question based on previously written questions, and you chose one. So I'm gonna jump in and ask you. I'm gonna present some information, and then you ask the question. Okay. The theory is that success comes through who you know, but in reality, there are three elements: who you know, who knows you, and how well you know yourself. Who you know is all about the relationships you work to build and cultivate. Who knows you is about the impression or your brand you leave on the people, which is based on what you do, and the actions you take. And how well you know yourself is all about your strengths and weaknesses in the industry you're in and what you bring to the table with your craft. If the term "it's who you know" is one third of what helps success, then it stands to reason that building a circle of writer friends is worth the time and effort. Now, with that said, what are some things people can do to both build that circle of friends and to really get the most out of A, giving to that circle, and B, getting something from that circle?
Oh, good question.
Thank you.
And I did not know this question first.
That's right.
I do think that it's who you know, and I do think that you should network. And my first thought on that is to definitely go to conferences, like writing conferences or writing retreats, and try to make good friends in the writing community, and also always being positive and uplifting and giving back to the community. And that, I think that's really important because you don't want to just take. So whenever you, just even whenever you're posting on social media, there's the 80-20 rule. You really shouldn't just post about yourself and all your own accomplishments. You should also retweet or, you know, um, like forward and include other people in your tweets and there's the things that they have accomplished. And so there's just not just about you want to give back, and then people will start giving back to you. And of course, that's not why you do it. You do that to be friendly and helpful, but it's a circle and it just comes back to you. And so I think that's really important. So who you know, networking. I just had this conversation with myself this morning,
Yeah.
actually, and I thought, who are my favorite authors, and how can I get to know them? How can I cross paths with them? And I do think that's really important. And then also, even some people belong to critique groups.
Hmm.
I have not joined a critique group really. That doesn't really, I don't know, it just doesn't work with my style because I always want to edit.
Yeah.
And so I'm more of a line editor, and that's where I shine. So the critique groups haven't really worked for me, but they work for a lot of people. But I do go to writers groups, and I've met a lot of people in the writers groups. In fact, I was a member of the Romance Writers of America,
Oh,
and we
nice.
have a local chapter called Heart of Carolina Romance Writers. And I swear, if it hadn't been for that group, I would be 10 years behind where I'm at right now. I mean, they are amazing. So I definitely think that's important.
Now, those groups that you spend time with, and obviously, the thing is, why would anyone care about you unless you care about them? And it's
Hmm.
you're basically fueling the relationship until they go, oh, I'm interested because they're so nice, they're giving, they're caring. So let's build and bond together. And when you're in those groups, how has it influenced your career beyond just your ability to write and get your stories out? But has it elevated your career or led you
Hmm.
to successful outcomes?
Oh yeah, when I was in the Heart of Carolina Romance Writers, we often had editors that would come in from, like Penguin Random House,
Oh, nice.
and you start networking and getting to know them, and then it's so funny because you might just think it's a casual conversation that you have, but 10 years it may come back, and you may be faced with that same person again. So just for instance, I went to a Florida Romance Writers of America group. It was like in Orlando,
Hmm.
and one of our authors in our group was MC for the award ceremony.
Oh,
And, that's really big, but I'm a little bit more introverted. So I told my friend, I said, I am not going to this party. And she was having a party in her room. And she looked at me and she said, when a best-selling author invites you to a party, you go.
yeah,
And so I
absolutely.
said, okay, I really just want to put my pajamas on and sit in my bed and write, but okay, I'll go. So the funny thing was is we knocked on her hotel room door, and they opened the door and they were all looking at me and they said, "Oh, we've been waiting for you." And I just kind of looked around. I thought, how do you even know who I am?
Yeah.
And so they pulled me into the room and they said, uh, "Oh, we want you to meet somebody." And so I met the lady's publicist. And also, she's a publicist for many of the writers that are my favorite writers that I read
Mhm.
all the time. Okay, so I didn't know that though, knowing
Yeah.
I didn't know who she was when I first walked in the room. And they pulled me over, and she was wearing the identical dress that I was, which is normally horrifying for a woman. But
Yeah.
in this case, it worked out. We had we had the same pearl necklace on. I'm sure hers were real, mine were not.
Yeah.
And we had the same pearl earrings on, even the same shoes. And this person approached us and said, "Can we take your picture,
Yeah.
together?"
Yeah,
And so we
absolutely.
were laughing, and we stood next to each other and we were just cracking up. And they took the picture, and the person handed me their card and they said, "It'll be on our blog tomorrow." I'm like, "Oh, okay, thank you." Well, I didn't want to be obvious about it. So I just put it in my little purse. And so one of my friends came up a few minutes later and she said, "Who was that?" I said, "I have no idea." And she said, "Well, you need to look." And I said, "Okay, let's go in the other room." So I looked, and it was Publishers Weekly.
Oh, nice.
And I was on their blog for, that next morning, and with the publicist. So that just was one of these things. Fast forward 10 or 11 years, and I never thought I would ever see her again.
Yeah.
And I hired her as my publicist to help me with Coastal Christmas.
Oh, wow.
And
That's an
I rem-
amazing. Yeah.
yeah, and I reminded her of that photograph, and she's like, "Oh," she laughed and laughed, and she said, "I will never forget that." And so that's just how, if you network, it comes back around. And I've had several instances like that, not just that one.
Yeah, one of the things I always, I talk to people about, especially like with clients and stuff like that, the people you meet today are indeed the people that help you 10 years from now. Because you
Yes.
don't know who someone is, you don't know who someone knows. So be nice to everybody, right? It's like that kind of.
Yes. Watch
Um,
what you say. Don't say anything bad to anybody about anybody.
yeah, absolutely. Especially if you feel safe, you're like, I just need to get this over. No, no, no. You keep that in.
Yes, you can tell your mom or your dog, but you don't say that to anybody else
Yeah, not at all. Not at all.
because it's a very small world.
Yeah, it's especially in specific industries. Like the acting world is very small, even though there's like a lot of. But the same thing with the authors, etc., etc.
Yes.
Now you said two things. Well, the first I want to say is that not only do you preach community and such, so like, and bringing people together, but you actually are proactive in that. And in North Carolina on April 16th to the 21st, 2023. You have a get together, customize your writing retreat, which I guess, your proprietor, getting people to come and just focus on their writing as a group, and you're bringing people together. You're being active in that community.
Yes, it's my way to give back because in November of 2022,
Hmm.
I had a writing retreat and was educational. So I had guest speakers, I had guest speakers over Zoom and in person. And then I taught personally classes, and we had a total of 12 people.
Nice.
And I hosted it. It was my idea, and I pretty much did all of it. And it was so much fun. I had a blast. And it was just like a bunch of women coming together to, for a holiday meal. It was like they were coming home. And I had not known any of these people beforehand. So it was so much fun. I decided I wanted to do it again in April. But
Hmm.
this time I wanted to include people who just wanted to come just to write as a writing retreat, so they can
Nice.
customize it if they want the educational part with the meals, or do you just want to come and write to this gorgeous ocean view?
That's really great. And is it open to men, or is it female centric?
So last time we had one man that came, and
Hmm.
he just came to the day spot. So he didn't actually spend the night because some of the people were concerned about it, and we have a hot tub, and they said that would have been kind of
Okay.
awkward. And we, um, we watched a movie at night in our pajamas, and this movie was perfect to depict plot. So we
Hmm.
went through, and I stopped it at every single plot point and talked about it.
That's awesome.
So thank you. So it was just a little bit awkward, if he would have been there.
That makes
But
sense.
yes, but then I had other ones that said that worked out really well and they wouldn't mind. So if a male wanted to attend, then I would just ask the other attendees if they minded or not.
Which makes sense. And basically, what you're saying is, if gentlemen, if you do go, you are not allowed to wear bikinis.
Please don't.
However, onesies are allowed.
Please.
The second thing I wanted to bring up, which is I'm pro publicist, and a big thing that I preach about is, network market practice, right? The relationships, establishing a relationship with your brand and the community, and of course, practicing is knowing your craft, but as well as your strengths and weaknesses, so you have something to bring to the table when you're invited. Marketing is ultimately a publicist. A publicist helps you with the marketing element of it. And what I see a lot of independent writers, and I come from the music world originally, like that's where I started my career, and I moved into acting, writing, and et cetera, et cetera. Uh, Most people that aren't successful, they look poorly upon publicists and like marketing, and their brain is, I'll just allow my thing to get me to the next level. So if I could just put my book on Facebook, or if I could just say my book is coming out, or I could just hit publish on Amazon. I'm not knocking Amazon. I'm just saying. But I publish on Amazon, my book will sell. And
Mhm.
there is a difference between word of mouth and hopefulness, and having a publicist. Now, for my listeners, because a lot of them are trying to get the right mindset, um, what are some things that a publicist has done for you, and how could an author take advantage in a positive way of hiring a publicist?
So she helps connect me to other writers that were above me, and so that I could attend some of their events and conferences and things like that. But there were readers events, So I thought that was a really good tool. She also read through my book and gave me suggestions to make it more marketable so that I could go to my publisher and talk to my publisher about that. And I thought that was helpful. I really feel like that made my book more successful. And certainly I do all of my social media myself. So my publicist did not help me with that. She helped me with bigger things and more planning for the future as to where I want my career to go and how I'm going to achieve that.
Mm-hmm.
So even if you don't hire a publicist, you still need to put a lot of work into social media and getting out there, because your publisher used to maybe do that, but they don't do that anymore. Not
They're like, you
usually.
take care of that.
In fact, I'd always heard it was an 80-20 rule for that the
Mm-hmm.
publisher would do maybe 20% and the writer would do 80%, but it's more like 90% now.
And when it comes down to having the publicist look at your book, again, these are something I tell authors. I go, look, when you write your first draft, that's literally everything you want in your book, and that exists.
Mm-hmm.
However, you want a career, and sometimes you have to take things out of your book. You have to adjust things, and you have,
Yes.
your fan base. Now, again, you shouldn't write for your fan base at the expense of your creative side, because then you lose your voice.
Right.
However, it is interesting that your publicist came in and said, "Let me look at your book and clean it up." Was that difficult on your end as a creative person to let go and accept some of these changes, or did you push back hard at times?
No, not at all.
You're like, get it
I,
out.
I mean, I feel like that it shouldn't necessarily be your baby,
Mm-hmm.
that you need to step back. And if it is your baby, then, do you want a career in writing or not? Because you have to be adaptable to make it in the writing world. This is just my opinion, of my experience.
Mm-hmm.
But I actually hired an editor before I got picked up by a traditional publisher. I also write kids books. We didn't really talk about that, but I write kids chapter books. So I had self-published six books.
Mm-hmm.
And then I decided I did want to be picked up by a traditional publisher. So I hired an editor that used to work at Penguin Random House,
Oh, nice.
and she edited it for me, and she did developmental edits. And that was really difficult because that was my first real big editor that moved things around. Because I always feel like if you self-publish, you should always hire an editor,
Yeah.
because even though you think you're really good at editing, your eyes just glaze over words. Even if you and I also suggest I always suggest reading it out loud, but I discovered that Microsoft Word will read it to you.
Yep. Yep.
And, I finally learned that, and that has been fabulous. And my mom is also really good at proofing and
Yeah.
editing, but my mom is not an editor. My mom is my mom, and she's also biased. So when it went to that developmental editor, that was a little bit hard. It was a little bit difficult because on coast so I hired her for Island Summer and Coastal Christmas, and those were the two books that got picked up by a traditional publisher.
Yeah.
And I know that's why they got picked up, is
Because they.
because I hired her.
Yeah.
And like Coastal Christmas, she said, you need to move this entire scene and you need to put it here. And I was like, oh, that's a lot of work. But if you're not into a lot of work, then I mean, that's just kind of how it is. It's a lot of work to write a book, and a
Yeah.
successful book.
Yeah, you're absolutely 100%. I'm a story consultant and a developmental editor as well. Like,
Same
I
here.
help people and their stuff. So I know. And one of the things that you mentioned about, glazing over words and stuff like that. The other element is, if I wrote a book and I'm the author, I already know the story.
Right.
I know where it's going, so I might read something that should be moved, but it makes sense to me because I'm so connected to the story. I'm not confused, and that's the value of
Right.
having someone come in with fresh eyes. Is that they're ultimately, in a sense, that's what an alpha read is supposed to do too. They're your technical readers. They're supposed to
Hmm.
say this isn't working or whatever the case may be. So I love that, not only did you adapt your process, which led to you being traditionally published, but you took on the accountability of, listen, I know what I can do, but I know that I need a professional to come in and handle this because this
Hmm.
is my career, not a hobby. So I
Hmm.
love that little tidbit. I also want to
Thank
state
you.
uh, Penguin House is where R. Martin is published. If you know, from the Game of Thrones, for anyone listening,
Oh,
see, so they publish everything.
right. Not just beach books.
That's right. That's right. Like Island Summer, you got to get your Island Summer.
Right.
But that was last year, right? What the new one is coming out in October, or
No, I had two come out. That's a whole nother story. But I got a 2-book deal, and both books were finished. Thank you to the editor that I hired.
yeah.
But they had me come back and rewrite Island Summer in the first person. It was in third person.
Oh, that's an
And
interesting
I
change.
had 3 months to do that, and right before Christmas. And that's a huge edit. It to
Yes.
me would be easier going from first to third. But it was a huge edit because it's all internal dialogue and internal everything. And so I managed to do that and work full time, and we can talk about that later. But that was a big edit, but it
Yeah.
was so worth it because she was right. I'm a stronger writer writing in the first person than I am the third, because I tend to
Oh,
gloss over things unless I'm in my head. And I didn't know that about myself until she told me that. So also when it came to Coastal Christmas, um, I had it in the fourth chapter. They discover she gets this old farmhouse and she's restoring it, and they find these letters from Vietnam up in the
mm,
attic, and it was from his grandfather and grandmother, but he had never met his grandfather. And
interesting.
so he got a chance to get to know his grandfather through the story. But I had that in chapter 4. And
Mm,
she says, "Oh, no, 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 you need to move that. It has to be in the first 3 chapters to grab your reader's attention."
yep.
But she said, "Not only that, we're going to take one of the letters and put it at the very first of the book so that the reader knows what they're getting." It's,
Yeah, that's called the
and it,
promise.
yes, and it
Yeah.
increased the conflict. And the question is, I want to know what this letter is, and I want to read more about it. And that was brilliant. And I wouldn't have thought to do that.
Now, moving that discovery, from the attic, does that make it the inciting incident now because it was moved closer to the front? The ordinary world was explaining the promise and themes, and then they discover this new life, this new person's, you know, is that why they did that? Is to speed up the inciting incident?
So it was interesting because that's actually a subplot. So it
Oh,
would have been an inciting incident in the subplot, but there was also an inciting incident in the regular plot, which
okay.
did happen within the first 3 chapters. I
Yeah.
usually put it really pretty close, or at
Well,
least a
yeah,
hint of it.
I mean, you should, right? Like, like
Right.
it's a
I
thing that
hint
gets the
at it in
story
the
going.
first chapter, but yes, I have this nice little diagram, and I know my word count, and I have to make sure that my inciting incident happens at a certain point, but I always hint toward it or she's pondering it.
Hmm.
So that's actually a class that I teach at my writing retreat usually.
Oh, is like how to understand the plot
The
point
plot.
beats and stuff like
Mm-hmm.
that. Yeah. I that's one of my favorite things to talk about is plot and like working out because again, plot is not story and story is not plot. However,
Right.
a story with no plot goes nowhere, and a plot with no story is uninteresting.
Exactly.
Right?
I
Um,
love that.
would you say plot is what needs to happen and story is how it happens?
I would say so, yes. And I used to be, this is interesting, but I used to be more plot driven.
Mm,
And a lot of people are character driven, and a lot of readers like character driven.
yeah.
I mean, it just depends on the reader, but a lot of them like plot driven. But I thought I want to become more character driven, not just plot. I want to go deeper. So that's when I started doing that, and I really started studying other writers that are character driven,
Hmm.
and I learned how to do that. So definitely in Island Summer and Coastal Christmas, I'm definitely more character driven, and the one I'm writing right now is very character driven.
Now, what you're saying is for authors out there, for beginners and stuff like that, when it's character driven, the plot is what pulls them through the story, but it unfolds through their experiences more
Hmm.
so, instead of the plot being like there's going to be a blue laser shooting up into the sky at the end of the story. And they just need to stop the aliens from coming. Like that's the big difference.
Exactly. You have to have that conflict.
Yeah. Plot is we got to stop them. Character is let's watch what happens. Let's see how they work through these moments.
Definitely.
Uh,
They should definitely have a goal and a motivation as to why they want that goal, and they have to change from the beginning of the story to the end of the story.
and now that 100% true. And when it comes to character story, telling the story through the characters, when is a moment more for you and less for the story and should be taken out for authors if they're listening? If you're doing a character, you're like, oh, it's a character moment, but it should each moment really pull the story through, even if it's a character driven story.
Well, you don't want the author shouldn't interfere in that because you don't want to pull your reader out of the story.
Mm-hmm.
So everything should be through the eyes of the character, experiencing the world around them and the things that happen to them and things that make them change. If that answers your question.
Yeah. Well, to dig a little deeper, it's like you ever read a story, especially from an independent author, where it's like going through and you're understanding motivations and the characters growing. But then there's just this moment, for example, where they're just like, I need a new phone. And they go and get the phone because they love iPhones or whatever. And then, but it like literally feels like we stepped out of the story. And then the reason they kept it is because they're like, well, I just wanted people to know that they liked iPhones. like when should an author say to themselves, this is not serving the story, it's just this is for me moment.
Hmm. I remove those kind of scenes, and that's a good place for that to be in your first draft. But when you go back into your second draft, Kristen Hanna, I don't know if you know Kristen Hanna. She's a New York Times bestselling author, and she's incredible. She has this Netflix series, and I thought I want to take from the master. So I took a master class from her, and she
Yeah,
said, on your second draft, do not be afraid to move things around and to change things and make that dynamic. Don't just simply edit from A to Z. Move stuff around and make more conflict. So if there isn't some kind of conflict or some kind of internal, there has to be a reason for things to be in your story.
yeah,
It has to all make sense. I mean, you don't want it doesn't have to be so conflict driven that you wear your reader out, but it needs to have a reason to be in there or part of the character development. And probably the fact that they like an iPhone, I, it could just be that she pulls an iPhone out of her pocket. That's all you need. You don't need
yeah.
to tell the reader that.
It's the
They
show
don't
don't
need to
tell
pick up on
method.
it.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely. Show
Yeah.
don't tell.
Um, yeah, and when you're working on a story, especially for a novel, yeah, you can write a million words if you want for your first draft, but you do have certain word counts you have to reach or minimize your story to. Especially epic fantasies, you get a little bit more leeway. Brandon Sanderson's has 338,000
Oh,
words for the Way of Kings. However, like your book is probably what 70 to 80,000 words. The Island Summer.
I think it was 98,000, both
Oh,
of those.
okay, all right.
And that's getting for contemporary romance, which I was writing more women's fiction, and then they had me change it to contemporary romance, so I
Mhm.
would fit on a shelf in Barnes and Noble somewhere.
Okay, that makes sense.
So that was a deliberate thing, and I had to go back and rewrite scenes and take out scenes with the runaway girl
Well,
from her point of view and put in the man's point of view. I'm like, oh,
okay.
really? But I totally get it because it's hard to be found on a big shelf in the fiction section.
Oh yeah.
So it's just so each genre you should know what the word count is. And I know that my publisher anyway, they wanted less of a word count because it's cheaper to probably cheaper to publish.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm thinking that's more the trend. I mean, nobody said that. I'm just thinking that might be why.
Hmm.
But they asked if I could take a couple of scenes out just to lower my word count, and I did push back on that. I said, no, every scene that I have in there, it has to be in there to move my story forward. There is a purpose for everything that I have in my book. And so, anyway, they gave that to me. So it was about 98,000 words, both of those.
What a wonderful experience, though, for the publisher to say, "Listen, this is our experience, and we're trying to get the books, out there. However, if this is what you believe in, they actually took your side and stood by you, which is
Yes.
something Miramax did with Quentin Tarantino when he first did Reservoir Dogs.
Mm.
They were like, "Hey, you should take that ear cutting scene out," and he's like, "No, I need that." And they're like, "Okay, we'll release it as," which is
Yes.
unheard of. So it's good that they support you. That's really nice to hear.
They were really good about that. I had no problems with that at all.
Yeah.
And I
Uh,
even had some input in my covers.
oh, really? Oh,
So
that's
that made
good.
me happy because I'm really picky about my covers. And
You're
they
like,
sent
I
me a
need
bunch to
sand.
choose from, and I'm thinking, no, no, no. So I sent them pictures. And then on one of them, they actually used, on Coastal Christmas, they used it. And then on Island Summer, they came up with something that was similar to the one I sent them.
Oh, they so you took the picture of the Christmas ornaments for.
No, no, they gave me a website that I could,
Oh, okay, okay, okay.
peruse through and just pick out kind of the idea of what I like.
Hmm.
So I don't always get to say this is the one I want, but I can say, okay, I like this one and I like this one. And how about that one? Or, you know, can you make sure my branding is the same
Hmm.
for
Which
my
is
first two
important,
books?
and do you look at branding for, well, right now, you like you said, you have children books, but you also have this series. But excluding the children's book, because clearly they have to look different.
I have a whole different name for that.
Oh yeah,
I don't
see,
even
exactly.
mix them. So, yes.
Yeah, so it's like boom. But when because I have multiple series and I know other authors have series, there is a certain brand style that should be similar in all the books. But are you someone that feels each series should also have a distinct
Mhm.
brand to them?
Yeah, I would say so. And in fact, I just finished a book and it's out on submission to publishers right now. And it is not a beach theme book.
Okay.
But it will look different. The cover will look different, but it still follows along with my brand,
Hmm.
with friendships, complicated family dynamics, and working through those, and increasing self esteem from the beginning of the book to the end,
Oh, I like it.
it still has feral animals in it, so it's really the same brand, but it is different.
I'm glad you brought that up. And, a lot of authors, one of their struggles is, how do I find my voice? And believe it or not, one of those elements are themes. The themes that are important to you that
Hmm.
you write about becomes a part of your voice. Of course,
Hmm.
like your chapter lengths, how you use chapters for pacing, the word choices, et cetera, et cetera.
Hmm.
But it's interesting that you mentioned that because you are a traditionally published author, you have successful books, and you're utilizing those tools, which would be theme. And those are the things you like writing about, and that is why your audience comes back to you, because those are important things for them. They want, hey, I see myself in these situations.
Hmm.
With
I
that
have a
said,
tip.
oh, go
I'm
ahead, go,
sorry.
no, go
I have a tip for also finding your voice.
go for it.
So, on your first draft, I always suggest that try not to self edit very much. Try to just sit down and just start writing because that's when your voice starts to come out. If you really edit as you're writing, a lot of times you'll edit out your voice and not realize it. So I may even write a whole chapter and then I may go back and edit a little bit, but I do most of my editing on my second draft. So, but just to sit down every morning and just start writing and try not to stop.
That's a great piece of advice, especially the don't self edit while you're writing the first draft. Just let it
Hmm.
out. You never know where it's going to come and how it's going to grow up from there.
Hmm.
Now, a first draft is definitely different than a zero draft. I'm not sure if you've got to utilize the zero draft. Um, the zero draft is usually where my I love outlining, but I use the zero draft as a way to outline and discover. So I'll outline and then
Hmm.
work the outline through discovery, and then I
That's what I
start
do
my
too.
yeah. That's well, speaking of writing processes, that I love hearing the process of each author that comes in the show. So can you go a little bit into your process, the
Sure.
steps, to maybe kind of get other authors thinking?
Hmm. So I try to, so I outline a little bit. I actually have a diagram that I have created,
Hmm.
and I hope to have that book out soon.
Oh, like a
But
writing book, like a how to write.
yes,
Oh, wonderful.
yes. But so I have my diagram, and I always know. Let's say I have my designated word count, and I know where I am in my roadmap on my diagram. So I know at the midway point, let's say it's 100,000 word manuscript, just for simplicity's sake. At
Hmm.
50,000, I know that's my midpoint. And so at each point, I know is at 10%, you should have your inciting incident. So I kind of know, and then I figure out, oh, 10% at 10,000 words, I need to have had my inciting incident. So I kind of know where I'm at in the process. And then I'll write supporting scenes for each column that I have to take me to my plot point, just a couple.
Hmm.
And then I use the creative process to just go from there and make up things as I'm writing, because I have found that those are my best scenes. I need the organization as to know that I have all my key elements in there, so that it saves me from having to rewrite it later and put them in
Hmm.
manually, and then it's awkward
Yeah.
for me. But some of the scenes I don't even remember writing. It's weird. I'll go back on my second draft and I'm thinking, did I write that? So that's kind of cool.
It's
And
gnomes.
then, so my second draft is when I reorganize things and I have to bite my lip and move things around and
Hmm.
make myself, you think, where would the scene actually have more conflict? And actually, the book that's on submission right now, it was just a little flat in one part, and I thought something's off. The conflict, this should have a lot of conflict, but it's kind of dead.
Yeah.
And then I looked at my handy dandy worksheet and realized, oh, I have it in the wrong place. And so I moved it a scene or two earlier, and it was wow. It just popped off the page. It was so intense. So I really didn't change much of it, but it was just the placement of it. So I do that on my second draft. Plus, I'm editing as well.
Hmm. On your second
And
draft.
yes, and I've gotten to the point now though that my writing is fairly good enough that I don't have tremendous editing to do, because in my first 6 books or whatever, it was, a lot of editing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So now I'm thinking, okay, I'm writing cleaner, so that's good. And then on my third, and I also kind of read for pacing a little bit.
Hmm.
And then on my third draft, I read it from beginning to end, and I'm looking at how does it flow, how is the pace, do I see any grammar errors, punctuation errors, did I accidentally have a little extra space somewhere because I write it in that paragraph mode,
Yeah.
and I can see the spaces. And then I read it from beginning to end. And then I go back and I let Word read it to me.
Hmm.
And so by the time, and it's amazing how that helps, because you can hear the flow. And if you accidentally misspell something that your eye just kind of skates over, then Word will stumble,
Hmm.
and I'll catch it every time. So I definitely like to just have Word read it to me, and I fix, just make it smoother, and it always makes it more polished. And then after I'm finished, I'll send it to my beta reader, and
Okay.
they'll read it and they'll try to catch things, and then they send it back to me. And then I sometimes I'll put it on my Kindle and I'll catch
Oh.
things on my Kindle. And then I even this last one, I was the only person who has read the whole thing. And so I have an agent, and she said, "Well, Lori, you probably should have somebody else read it,
Yeah.
And so she said, or at least proof it or something, make it in the best shape you can. So I paid for an editor, a professional editor, to edit that, not developmental editing,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it's actually nonfiction and the timeline I can't change. But I definitely, she caught some things, but it must have been in pretty good shape because it wasn't like some of the edits I'm used to seeing.
Yeah.
And then anyway, so now it's ready so that if a publisher comes back and they like my proposal and they want the full manuscript, there it
That's
is.
wonderful. Yeah. So,
So
that's a pretty tight process. And to give anyone who's listening, to compare it to, say, a film script, what you write in that first draft, or even let's say you do 10 drafts and you start filming it, what's on that page is not what you're going to film, because now it has to go through the lens of the director. It has to go through the editor, and, everything goes through. And that's basically the writing process in a nutshell. Is once you're done with your version of the book, now an editor
mm-hmm,
looks at it. Then you have the publisher look at it, and
mm-hmm,
it changes the lens in which it's being viewed. And this is why it's good to start learning to let go
yes,
before you get to that complete process.
yes,
I
because you'll have at least three other edits once your publisher gets it,
Oh yeah, easily,
and then
easily.
and then approve easily, and then the proofers will go through it, and then here it comes again, and then it's out of your hands
Yeah.
if they change it, and I don't get to see it again. So um, but by that point I'm sick of reading that book. So every single time that my book has come out, I don't even read it. I can't do it. I'm afraid I'm going to find a mistake or something and get upset about it. So finally at Coastal Christmas, I decided I was looking for an excerpt, and
Yeah.
I started reading it and I got pulled into the story. So I read about half of it because by then I had had enough time to rest. But I wanted to say, I was saying that with nonfiction, I had written the whole book. I just want to clarify that usually nonfiction, you can sell it on proposal, but it was a
Okay.
memoir. In a
Oh,
memoir, you have to write the whole thing. I
that's
just wanted to
right.
clarify that.
Yeah, it's so basically, if you're writing a nonfiction, they'll pay you in increments for
Mhm.
X amount of pages at a time. But when it comes to fiction, I believe you have to have a full manuscript to submit. Correct?
At least in the beginning until you get in with a publisher, and
Mm-hmm.
then it sometimes they have a clause in there that they get the first eyes on it to
Okay.
possibly buy it. And I my I've been told before that we will buy it without it being written. We just need a synopsis.
Oh yeah. Well, especially if you've proven yourself, they know what
Mm-hmm.
you understand story. Your audience is definitely like, I'm sure Brandon Sanderson doesn't have to really be like, "Hey, will you take my next
Mm-hmm.
book?" They're like, "When is your book coming out?" Uh,
Right.
or even a Stephen King. People are going, "I'm gonna have to see it first, buddy."
Yeah. So he may have to write a synopsis so they at least know what the book is about. But
Yeah. Which, by the way, he doesn't even know. According to his interviews,
oh,
he's a pantser.
okay.
And he picks up he thinks of like a weird idea, all right, and then he puts them into scenarios and he writes it until it gets boring, he says, and then he goes, all right, I'm gonna kill someone or throw an alien or I'm gonna do something weird, and then I'm like, how did I get out of this? And that's how he writes, he says.
So maybe he's farther along and he can just sell it on his name. I'm
Yeah,
not
right.
sure.
He's just
I'm
like,
not
yeah,
there yet.
I'm Stephen King. um
Maybe someday.
I do have a question about your process with the where you were talking about word count and 10%. If you're doing 100,000 words, 10,000 words would be this. And does that include if you're writing a prologue and or an epilogue to your story, or like your word count includes those, or is it excluding those?
No, my word count includes those.
Okay. So even your diagram where you're saying, all right, when I get to 50,000 words, that's including the
Hmm.
3,000 to 5,000 words I may have used in the prologue.
Yeah. So let's say an epilogue, I would just count that as part of my resolution.
Yeah, like the this is where they are now.
Right. And I've never written a prologue, so
Are you just not interested in prologues, or is it because there is that big con? Like, are they worthy? Should you or should you not? Yeah.
I don't know. It's controversial. I actually, in the one that's on submission right now, I did write a prologue and they had me remove it. So,
Good job.
so, and then I had to rewrite the whole first chapter to make it engaging enough for the beginning of the book. So I thought, I don't think I'm going to write those anymore unless a specific publisher tells me they want to.
But you could throw them for a loop. You go, tricks on you. The whole book is a prologue for my series.
Exactly. And I have something motivational if you want me to share it.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
So, like last year, I was able to quit my full time job and write
Amazing.
full time. And you'll appreciate this because I had to change my writer's mindset to get to that point. And I'm in healthcare, and
Okay.
after the whole COVID thing, in being a semi frontline worker, I was burnout. I had just had enough, and then we ended up actually getting a pay cut.
Oh.
And I thought, I can't do this anymore. I've given everything I have, and I'm just going to do it when as needed, when they
Mm-hmm.
as a kind of a consultant.
Yeah.
But before then, I started when I knew I started getting burnout. It was a good year before I was able to quit. And so I decided I would wake up every morning and I would write in the morning before I went to work because I wanted to prioritize my writing.
Mm-hmm.
But when I decided that I need to quit and I'm going to give myself a year to do this, to prepare for this. So I changed my mindset and I thought, okay, my writing is my full-time job, even though it
Excellent.
wasn't on paper and the paycheck wasn't supporting that, right?
Yeah.
I thought I'm a full-time writer and this healthcare job is my secondary job, even though I'm doing it 40 hours a week.
Yeah.
And, and so I started, instead of getting up an hour before, I got up an hour and a half before I went to work.
Mm-hmm.
Now my kids are older,
Yeah.
so that makes it easier. And so then I started writing on my lunch break. I had an hour
Mm-hmm.
and it takes me 15 minutes to eat.
Yeah.
I thought, what am I going to do with the other 45 minutes? I used to chat and
Mm-hmm.
scroll on Facebook and take a walk. I thought, nope, I'm going to write. So I just apologized to my coworkers. I thought, hey, I'm not being antisocial or anything, but I have this book goal and I need to reach it.
Yeah.
So I started writing on my lunch hour, and then I would come home, I'd take care of kids, I would cook, do whatever I needed to do. My teenagers would disappear in the rooms.
Yeah.
And instead of scrolling on social media or whatever, I sat down and I started writing again. So eventually that paid off and you really have to be careful what you ask for because when I said it was my full-time job, I manifested it.
That's
So,
awesome.
and then all of a sudden, they cut my hours because we lost a contract. They cut my hours to 20 hours a week from
Oh
40,
wow.
even though I still have my benefits and everything. That's a huge pay cut.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, well, I asked for it.
This is what you
And
wanted,
so
right? Yeah.
this is what I wanted. So that gave me more time to write. So I started filling those days off with writing. Like
Mm.
I would pretend that this was my real full-time job. And how does
Excellent.
that look? I'm going to get up and I'm going to eat breakfast and then I'm going to sit down and I'm going to write. And how would it look if I really didn't have to go to work? How would I spend my day? And, and I would schedule in times to talk to maybe my mom on the phone or things
Yeah.
like that. But I treat it like a business. And then by the end of, was it 2020?
Yeah.
I put in my notice and they talked me into working another month, which I reluctantly did because it was a holiday. It was Christmas. I thought it would be really nice to be writing full time now, but it paid off. And then in January of 2021, I was able to quit, and I've been writing since, which is also why I'm doing my writing retreats to sort of supplement my income.
Mm-hmm.
And and it's amazing how it has taken off. an entirely different place this year than I was when I quit my job last year. It
That's
has
such a beautiful
grown so
story.
much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To take control of your, and you kept saying a couple of things that I really love, for those people listening who are like, this is what I want to do for a living, is you prepared a year out.
Yes.
You made the mindset shift. You planned your day as if it was your work day, right? So
Mm-hmm.
now I kind of want to touch on that, so authors understand a work day is not just writing,
Mm-hmm.
because it's a business, and we all know businesses survive on the network market practice only. You can't just have a thing, and I tell people, if you can, then write your book, put it in your closet, close the closet, and don't tell anyone about it. Well, I have to tell someone about it. Well, that's marketing. That has nothing to do with your book, right? And then my other favorite one is, for example, I'm interviewing you. You're an author. We're learning about your journey, who you are. We have yet to read your book. And if your book is so important as an author, then why don't they just read the book on the interview? And the reason is
Mm-hmm.
because people have to connect to a brand, which is the
Mm-hmm.
truth of who you are, which includes your themes, the things that are
Mm-hmm.
important to you. And they hear, oh, I can relate to that, or I always had a dream, or blah, 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 blah. So it's just interesting that you said that. Now, with that said,
I love that. Mhm.
thank you, thank you. What is you like a traditional business day for you as an author?
So I'll get up about 6:30. I I know my son's a teenager, but he's the last one in the house.
Hmm.
And I like to make his lunch because I want to know what he's eating for lunch. I want to because he will not even make a sandwich. He'll
Okay.
throw some M&Ms in a bag and call that lunch. So I make him lunch and I hang out with him while he's eating. And then after he leaves to drive to school, then I sit down and I start writing, and I write in the morning
Hmm.
until about noon.
Okay.
And I've never been one to really say I have to have this word count because that stresses me out.
Hmm.
But sometimes if I'm under a strict deadline, I can see the benefit of that. So sometimes I'll say, okay, I have to write 2,000 words today.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, I just write in that time frame, and that's about what I need to be writing anyway,
Uh-huh.
without the resistance. And
Excellent.
then and so then at noon, I'll, around noon or one, somewhere I'll eat. And also before he actually gets up, I do all my social media posts.
Okay.
So I'm usually laying in bed, laying in bed
Yeah, just get it out of
and
the
doing
way
my
right then.
Instagram and my
Yeah.
Twitter, and then I'll get up. And so that's already all done. And then I'll go in later and I might answer all the questions, especially
Hmm.
on Twitter. I get a lot of responses. So I want to answer as many as I can,
Hmm.
or at least like them or something. And then it's amazing how I have a planner. So I'll jot down things that I know that I need to do for
Hmm.
that week, and I itemize them out by the day. But it's amazing. Like today, for instance, I have an email from my agent
Hmm.
on updates on our submissions. So I have to go in there and read it again and then respond to her.
Hmm.
And then I also have all the edits from the book that's out on submission for the whole book. I need to go in there and start making all the changes for those books. So I will do all that. And then while I'm still writing another book. So I
Yeah.
might do that in the afternoon or the evening. I probably work more hours now than I did when I was full time.
But
So
it's
I'll
your
probably
business.
do that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I, before I was full time, whatever.
Now I'm full time, full time,
Yeah.
full time.
So and then there's okay, so then I'm scheduling interviews. I'm trying to figure out what I want my year to look like,
Hmm.
because I already have things planned through June, really, maybe almost even into November,
Oh, that's
of the
great.
things I want to do. And I want to organize some reader events and things like that. So I'm trying to work on those to kind of see who I might want to invite to do those and what venue I might want. So I'm working. That's all my marketing. It's not just social media.
Yeah, which is important, because those events are an extension of your brand. And I know brand sounds mechanical, but it's brand is the truth of who we are. It's our our missions, our morals, and our purpose, kind of like put into one. And and they don't exist if we don't do anything with them. You can be like, I'm a good person all day, but if you're not being a good person, it's hearsay, right? So it's like
Right.
um
But
I do
it's also work play balance too,
absolutely.
because you have to be careful what you ask for. Again, oh, I want all these big book contracts, I want this and this and this, but it needs to be a good work play balance, because if you're all work and no play, then you don't have anything to write about.
Yeah, yeah, like it's the thing. It's when you become stuck on the white page, you think, well, what have I experienced in the last month? And
Hmm.
if you're not experiencing things, it's difficult to find the emotion through characters or the
Hmm.
conflict through moments, even if they're small conflicts. And speaking of like missions and having your time planned out, I had a client way back in the day that was an actor, and their goal was to. I was like, well, what are your goals as an actor? Like, what are you going to schedule your plan out? And their thing was get a lead role, win Oscar, work with Robert De Niro, like things that are not necessarily goal oriented.
Hmm.
These would be nice if I can. And I says,
Hmm.
yeah, but how many people are you contacting this week? What events are you going to? How are you going to get people involved? Who's working on stuff that you can volunteer your time? And they're like, what is that? How's that going to help me? It's
Hmm.
like, well, if you're not involved in your industry, then people don't know you exist. And if
Hmm.
people don't like you, they're not going to want to hire you. But instead
Hmm.
of trying to work with Robert De Niro, work with the next Robert De Niro as they're developing and you're
Yes.
developing. And
Yes.
I say that because writers have the same ability. Brandon, I bring him up a lot because I studied him a lot. Uh, his group, his writing group, are famous, successful writers that he went to college with,
Yes.
and he writes with them to this day. They're the Alpha
Hmm.
Reader team, and imagine trying to get Stephen King to be your alpha reader if you don't know him and you're unknown. Well, you
Hmm.
can't. But you could get the next Stephen King or the next Margaret Weiss or the next, whatever the case may be. And so it's
Yes.
interesting that you plan out your day and you take it seriously. And like you said, you got to work more
Hmm.
at the thing you want
Hmm.
than, well, if I work some hours, I get a paycheck. Well, of course, because there's other people. This, you're being exchanged out for another employee, and they
Hmm.
don't need you all day every day, but your career needs you all day every day,
Hmm.
no matter what the case may be.
And hopefully it'll pay off in the end,
Yeah, yeah, absolutely,
or at some point.
well, one of I have a mantra. I go, what you do is not your job. Your job rewards you financially to do the thing you do passionately.
Hmm.
And what that
Yes.
basically means is writing doesn't make you money because, again, you could write a book, you put it
Hmm.
on in the closet, close the closet door. Your
Hmm.
job is the things that get you noticed. Your jobs are building relationships. Your jobs are getting your brand out there.
Hmm.
Your jobs are establishing, like, for example, you said you have the email from the editor. Now, if you don't
Hmm.
respond to them,
Right.
your book's not going to go anywhere. So your
Right.
job is to like
To be
do these other.
professional and timely.
Yeah, exactly. Which, by the way, has nothing to do with your book because it could be anything. It could be you invented a new car, you invented a new whatever, a new
Hmm.
technology. It's the act of what needs to get done
Hmm.
outside of completing the thing that comes easily to you. You are passionate about writing.
Yeah.
So you don't
Definitely.
need to work at writing. Like
Right.
you don't you'll write even if you had no publisher. Like it's just who you are.
Right.
And I try to tell people it's like that's the easy part. That's the reward. Do your job. Like I love that you work a couple hours to write and then you do your job, you do your
Hmm.
responsibilities, and then you'll give yourself to another project which you've earned. And then you have other things. You do your social media before you get out of bed. And
Hmm.
that's the mentality of a successful person is it's not just giving time to writing. I
Hmm.
have to give time to my career. Now, with that said, I have my final question. You had picked two, and I
Oh, I
want to.
forgot about this second one.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's coming.
Okay, I'm ready.
Now it's a little shorter than the other one. All right, so here it is. If you could go back in time to the day you decided you wanted to be a writer, what advice would you give yourself that would be considered career advice and strategy, and less about the craft?
Oh gosh. I might say, don't do it. No, I'm just kidding. That's not the answer you were wanting.
It's an answer, though.
It was like peeling an onion, and then you realize, oh my gosh, could I do all that again? But yes, I could. The first thing I would love to tell myself would be to get a financial advisor.
Oh, yes, yes.
So that I could have quit way earlier
Okay.
and made good decisions, so that it wouldn't have taken me. I started writing in 2009, 2010, and also I would I would have told myself, look at the market right now. Amazon's just starting out,
Yeah.
and I would have loved to have gotten more books out earlier and taken that seriously before it. Right now, it's really hard to get into Amazon and to be seen.
Yeah.
But the same thing, we're sitting here, and only more people are only going to start publishing even more and more and more books. So now is always the time to invest in yourself. So start where you are and invest and move forward. So instead of just thinking, well, I have tomorrow and I have the next day. And, because I've seen some friends who self-published and they wrote a book every 3 months. And I thought, oh, that's just crazy. How do you do that? When do you have time to just breathe? Yeah. But they're successful, way, way more successful. And, and it's because they got on it at the right time. So making sure that you're not even missing the boat now, because even though there are millions of people on Amazon, it's just going to get more crowded.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and they're also doing that thing with, not to bring up Brandon Sanderson, but did you hear the thing about Audible, where he's not putting his new books on there because they make self-publishing authors have to go exclusive on their Audible, and they get a higher percentage. But if they do like a more widespread, they actually get such a low percentage, it costs them money to have their book on there, basically, because they're not making any money. It's
interesting. I didn't hear that.
Yeah, so he says, he goes, I love Amazon, I love what they do, but they're making bad choices. And before I put my new books on Audible, who have been good to me in the past, the indie writers need whales to basically help them. And so he's actually taking a stand until they change some of their
interesting.
Yeah, I thought that was beautiful.
I like that. I guess just being strategic in your plan.
Yeah. Too. Yeah. You gotta be, right? You gotta be like, well, I can't just stop working. Like, I have to have
right. Plan, like I said, I had that conversation with myself this morning. How am I going to meet these people? But also meeting your top best-selling authors right now, it's the people who are around you that are going to be a best-selling author next.
Yep. Absolutely.
So those are the relationships that are really important. And then when you really start investing in those, gosh, your group and yourself, you might be the next best-selling author, and all your friends, and then people are going to be wishing, well, how am I going to get to know them? So, embracing today.
Yeah. Be the next Castle. No.
Yeah. I like that.
Yeah. That show was amazing, by the way. All right, Lori Hayes, thank you so much for coming on to the Right Mindset podcast and giving us a little insight to the industry, your career, and the writing process. For those listening through audio, how can people find you?
LoriHayesAuthor.com.
Okay, excellent. And just for anyone that's Lori, and then the last name is Hayes, and an author as in the word, not the train. I don't know what that means. .com. Dot is not DOT. All right. So, and anyone who's watching on YouTube, all her information will be in the description below, as always. Lori, again, thank you from the bottom of my heart. I'm glad that we're getting to know each other a little bit more, and we're going to continue to grow this relationship for when we're both best huge authors.
And thank you so much for having me. I had a lot of fun.
Yes, of course. And if you ever want to come back on, you just give me a little message and say, hey, I have a book coming out. I would love to do another interview.
Thank you.
All right, everyone. As always, you got to keep developing the right mindset. See you next time. Bye.